Hi, I'm Dave, Dave's Vintage Baseball Cards, and today I'm going to revisit an old story that from 2004 that many people have been asking me to discuss the story again, and I don't know if you can see this okay, but this is an article out of the December 2004 Sports Collectors Digest. Anyway, as many of you who know me know, and some of you who are just getting to meet me will find out, that in the hobby of collecting baseball cards, I'm one of the larger dealers in the 19th century material, specifically speaking, Old Judge cards. I started dealing Old Judge cards, about 6 or 7 years ago, and had several hundred of them on my website with many, many images, and lots of information on the website about Old Judge baseball cards. So if you were to go to, say, Yahoo or Google or something like that and do a search for Old Judge baseball cards, I would be the guy that you would find as number 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that. And then when you went to the site, you would find a lot of content, whereas some of the other sites, they may have a couple of cards or talk about them a little bit, but really not very impressive and not much to see. So one day I'm driving on the way. Here's the way the story goes. I'm on my way to the golf course. I'm driving my car over there, and my phone rings. I answer the phone, and I get a gentleman from Oregon by the name of Louis on the line, and he proceeds to tell me, "Hi, Dave. Yeah, I was on your website." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay." And he says, "And I noticed a couple of cards you have, the Delahanty and the Anson." And I'm thinking, okay, well, these are cards that I have priced at about $4,000 or $5,000 a piece. He says, "I have some of those." I said, "Really, some of those?" Pull my car over to the curb. I say, "Louis, you got my attention. Tell me, what's the story here?" He proceeds to start to tell me a story about how his wife's mother, who's 93 years old, lived in Hemet, California, and a year earlier they went down, they got her, and they moved her up to Hemet. Up to Medford, Oregon. In the process of going through all of her stuff, let me back up a little. When they moved her from Hemet up to Oregon, they went down there with a U-Haul, and they're loading up the U-Haul with all their stuff, and along with all the rest of the stuff is this old briefcase. The daughter looks at the old briefcase, shows it to the mom, says, Mama, what about this?" And she says, "Oh, it's junk, just throw it away." Well, the daughter doesn't listen. She tosses it in the U-Haul anyway. So, about a year later, in the process of going through all of her various stuff, postcards, souvenirs, things commemorating trips and tours that she had taken, they come across the briefcase. The husband, Louis, he opens it up, and he finds scrapbooks. 13 or 14 of them to be exact. Some of these had, various names written on them. There were lists of cards, and each one of them was full of pages like this with Old Judge baseball cards glued onto these pieces of paper, and each scrapbook had between 75 and say 100 or so baseball cards in it. He indicated to me that he'd gone through about 3 of these books already. And I said, "Well, what do you want to do? Do you want to keep these books? Do you want to sell these books?" He says, "Oh, well, we figured they're either completely junk or worth a fortune, and we want to sell them." I said, "Okay." I advised him that because they're fragile, and he's not really an expert at handling these things, why don't I come up? We'll take a look at them, set them aside, don't go through the books anymore, we'll go through them together. And I proceeded to make a complete checklist in a Excel spreadsheet, sent it up to him, made a copy for myself, and went up there, and we went through these together. Now, it might be interesting to note that Matilda, who was 93 at the time, this baseball card collection was her father's childhood collection. Her father was born in 1876. So in 1886, when these cards started to be issued, he was 10 years old. He lived back in Washington, D.C. area. I think he worked as a postmaster or something like that. And he died in 1947. So Matilda ended up with these cards, and she got married, and her husband retired in 1974. In 1974, he started tinkering with these cards. I don't know whether he's the one that put them in the scrapbook. I assume that he is. And he actually, from what I was told, started selling off and trading some of these cards. The family told me that prior to him dying in 1981, he had sold off probably a couple $1,000s worth of cards. At the card prices back then, that could have easily been 500 or 600 cards. These cards weren't worth very much at the time. When I got up there and started going through all these cards, there was 1,450 of them, including a couple of Lone Jacks and an old Judge boxing card. So you figure at one time, this collection may have had over 2,000 cards. As we were going through these cards, and before I even got up there, I contacted a few of my customers and started getting want lists. And once I came back home with these cards, because Louis decided that he would have me sell these cards for them, which is what I did. Once the hobby became aware that I had this find of over 1,400 old Judge cards, virtually every advanced collector in the hobby started sending me their want lists. And at that point, I saw some very interesting patterns of cards that were showing up on everybody's want list. There are certain cards in this collection which are, quote, impossible. Everybody needs them. So in those particular cards, even though they're not distinguished in the price guides, if you know what everybody's looking for, you can pretty much charge whatever you want for those type of cards. You don't run across them very often. There were cards in this set that were previous poses that were previously not known to exist. There were players that showed up in this collection on teams that was not known to exist. There were new poses, two-player poses. Let me show you some of the old Judge cards from that era. And these cards here, I have subsequently taken almost all the cards that are left and sent them to Sports Cards, SGC, the grading company. And I think they look very nice that way, and they're protected. There is one factor on these cards which identifies them as Oregon Find cards. And I designated this find as the Oregon Find because obviously it was found up in Oregon. And this is one of the cards that will dictate that. The Oregon card finds, almost every card had the little hinge mark up at the top and a spot of glue in the middle from where they were attached to at least one scrapbook at one time or another. As you can see, the cards are in pretty nice condition, with the exception of the schmutz on the back. And this card goes into a 20 holder where under normal circumstances this would probably go into a 40 holder. It shows a little bit of wear anyway, but with the damage on the back like that, even though they're blank backs, there's no writing on the back, the grading companies really severely penalize the cards for back damage. But as you can see, and here's another one with some back damage, the front of the card's really nice. But they're protected, they're in these card holders now. And this is just a small sampling. At one time, and towards the end of 2000, middle of 2004, I had over 2,000 of these cards, and I'm down to about 300 now. It's not that often that you would come up with a find of a large quantity of cards, and I thought for sure that this was a once-in-a-lifetime deal, and to this magnitude it was. However, 2 years later, I had an almost identical story with a 93-year-old woman who had her husband's childhood collection, and that was over 200 cards, and I bought those also, and those can be seen at my website listed under the Indianapolis find. And those cards, while there weren't as many of them, they were in absolutely beautiful condition. And once again, there were some impossible cards in there. They came in this little box here, this little cigar box. And of course, there's not too many of those left anymore either. But anyway, this is just kind of a fun story of old Judge cards, little hidden treasures that you never know when you might stumble on them. And I just wanted to share that story with you today. you know where you can find me. I'm at gfg.com. My name is Dave, and thanks for watching my story today.